is time for version 44 of the Brawl Stars competitive tier list. And some things have changed, a lot of crazy things. Gadgets have been reworked in a major way and balance changes, and we got new hypercharges. So we're going to rank every brawler from worst to best. And this was not made by myself, okay? This was made by 22 of the best pro players in the world. And their feedback has helped make this as accurate as possible. One thing to keep in mind though, is that 6 of the hypercharges have not been released yet at the time of making this. So there are 6 brawlers who may be a little bit better, but we did our best with what we could. Starting us off, staying in the F tier is Doug. No changes have been made to Doug in a while, and he is back to being the worst brawler in the game. Bonnie is going from the D tier down into the F tier. I suspect that Bonnie will be played a lot more once she gets a hypercharge, but right now, her stats are really underwhelming, and she's pretty unplayable competitively. Pam is moving from the B tier all the way down to the F tier. Pam has been a decent brawler for a long time, but because of the way that the meta has changed, there's just never a good reason to play her right now. Okay. D tier brawlers. These ones also suck. They just aren't as bad as the F tier. And Edgar is staying in the D tier. Edgar can still be a decent counter pick in really rare situations competitively, but he's almost never played in actual competitive matches because once you know how to play against him and once you have like the draft format just makes it so hard to play Edgar. I have witnessed this firsthand because he's one of my only brawlers on my skin locked account. Let me tell you, he really struggles after like Diamond. Meg has moved the B tier down into the D tier. Very similar to Pam, Meg really doesn't do anything exceptional right now, and there are just simply a lot of other brawlers that are better to use. Charlie's moving from the C tier down into the D tier. Charlie used to be one of the best brawlers for countering aggressive brawlers, but there are several other brawlers now that do a much better job than her. Bull is staying in the D tier. He's still one of the easiest tanks to counter. He doesn't have great stats compared to other tanks either. Mo is moving from the C tier down into the D tier. Nothing changed for Mo this update. He still just doesn't have the damage output that he would need in order to compete with most other brawlers. Okay, now we got the C tier brawlers. These ones aren't actually like competitive. You don't really see them that used very often, but you can play them. And I don't know if you want. Grom has actually moved from the D tier up into the C tier. Grom didn't receive his hypercharge this update. Well, he will, but not yet. It's probably going to make him significantly better. Until then, he's probably the worst thrower at the moment. BB has moved from the B tier down to the C tier. BB's a little bit better than before now that she can use her heal gadget several times through a match, but not much better. Chester is staying in C tier. We've seen Chester's hypercharge, and it might make him broken, but until it's actually released, he's below average. He could end up in the A tier though. Chuck is staying in the C tier. Chuck is really only good for heist, and it seems like more and more brawlers are countering him as each update goes by, so he's not as good as he used to be. And some of that also might have to do with the fact that people are learning how to play against him. He's pretty good in lower tiers though, like not competitively, like he's pretty awesome in heist. Clancy's moved from the B tier down into the C tier. Clancy didn't get any buffs, and he is slowly struggling more and more to keep up with the meta. Colt is staying in the C tier. No changes were made to Colt, and he's another brawler that really is only good for heist. Miko is moving from the D tier up into the C tier. There we go. Miko has slightly benefited from the gadget rework, but he's still only good for countering certain brawlers. Jackie's moved from the B tier down into the C tier. She didn't get any buffs. I thought that her gadget that made her move fast every 10 seconds was like gonna really make her strong, but there are just so many tanks that are so much better than her. Shelly is staying in the C tier. Shelly is still only being played like about as much as she was last update, which isn't a lot. I do think that the gadget rework helped her slightly. Jesse's moving from the B tier down to the C tier. Lots of brawlers that can easily deal with Jesse's turret are now at the top of the meta, so she's not being played quite as much as she was before. Lily has moved from the B tier down into the C tier. It's honestly debatable whether the gadget rework helped Lily or hurt her, but I think the majority feel like the gadget's long cooldown has made her overall worse. Shade is moving from the A tier down into the C tier. Shade has been a little overestimated since he's been released, and especially after the last update, more and more competitive players recognize that he's just not that strong. Sam has moved from the B tier down into the C tier. Like many other close-ranged aggressive brawlers, Sam is just getting countered more often than the last update. Nani has moved from the B tier down into the C tier. Nani's really good against brawlers that don't have a whole lot of health, but most of the top brawlers right now are not that way. They have decent amount of health, they can pretty much deal with Nani really easily, so Nani struggles. Willow's moved from the B tier down into the C tier. She still doesn't have her hypercharge, so most players are just using other throwers that do. Gale's moved from the A tier down into the C tier. Gale didn't receive any nerfs or anything like that, but the way that the best brawlers have, well, a lot of the best brawlers now has changed, and that has kind of hurt him more than most other brawlers. So there's just not quite a need for him right now, not competitively. Fang is staying in the C tier. Fang is another close range brawler that just cannot compete with the top close range brawlers, and he gets easily countered. Ems is moving from the B tier down to the C tier. Ems got hurt a little bit by the gadget rework and just can't keep close range brawlers away from her as well as she used to. Now it's time for the B tier. These brawlers are competitive to some degree. They typically require being played on the right map with the right team comp to counter certain brawlers. They're good. They just may not be as good as the A tier or the S tier brawlers, at least not as frequently. Rosa's moved from the C tier up into the B tier. Rosa still isn't amazing, but both of her gadgets benefited a ton from the gadget rework, so she has finally moved up a tier. Pearl is staying in the B tier. Nothing changed for Pearl. She's right about where she was on this list from the previous update as well. Terra is staying in the B tier. Terra's clone gadget might be slightly better now due to the update, but she's struggling a bit with this meta, like the top brawlers. But there are still plenty of really good brawlers that struggle with her clones, so she's worth considering to counter brawlers. Lola is staying in the B tier. She hasn't received her hypercharge as of the time of recording this video, but she's getting another hypercharge that could really move her up on this next tier list, so keep her in mind. Spike is staying in the B tier. If you've played against Spike a lot, you kind of already know how to avoid damage from a distance, even with his curveball star power. I'm not saying that I can avoid his curveball star power, but the pros can. And honestly, right now, he's just a little bit underwhelming, and so that's why he's in the B tier. Still good though. Otis is staying in the B tier. Otis is a really good, safe choice on almost every map, but he's still not quite as strong as many of the other brawlers in the game. Dynamite is staying in the B tier. Like always, Dynamite is still getting countered by high mobility brawlers, but he can deal some good, crazy damage to brawlers that can't dodge him very well. RT is staying in the B tier. Very similar to Otis, RT is usually a good, safe option, but how valuable he is kind of depends a lot on who his teammates are, so he's not quite an A tier brawler. Crow is staying in the B tier. Now, Crow's hypercharge has kind of turned him into another like heist only brawler, but he's still a very underrated brawler and can counter a lot of brawlers, especially with now his shield gadget. It's actually really strong and annoying to deal with. Bo is staying in the B tier. He has received his hypercharge this update and it has made him better, but it's only made a slight difference for him. Cordelius is staying in the B tier. He's a great counter to a lot of aggressive brawlers, but he's not quite consistent enough to be an A tier brawler. Leon is moved from the C tier up into the B tier. And let me tell you what, he is being played a lot below gold right now. That's because he's maxed out for free and everybody wants to play him. But both Leon's gadgets have benefited a lot from the gadget rework. And even though Leon didn't get any buffs, he's being used a lot more. Maybe have something to do with the fact that he's free for everybody. El Primo is moving from the C tier up into the B tier. Nothing really major has changed for El Primo, but he's still a decent counter to a lot of the top brawlers right now. Brock is staying in the B tier. He's slightly better with the gadget rework, but he's still not as good as most of the other sharpshooters in the game, so B tier seems to be a good place for him right now. Buster is staying in the B tier. He has not yet received his hypercharge at the time that I'm recording this, but he's still a very solid choice as far as close range brawlers go, and his new hypercharge, it might make him broken again. We'll have to see, especially with some of the top tier brawlers right now. Draco is staying in the B tier. Draco probably got hurt a little bit by the gadget rework, but he's still a solid tank option on most maps, especially if he has a healer to help him. Mortis is staying in the B tier. No changes were made to Mortis, but he's slightly better than before just because of how the meta has kind of changed. Eve is moved from the A tier down into the B tier. The damage over time that is dealt by Eve's hashlings is not nearly as strong as last update because of certain brawlers at the top of this list. And you'll see why. Carl is staying in the B tier. Very similar to Bo, Carl received his hypercharges update, but it doesn't seem like it has made much of a difference for him. Honestly, I thought it was the least, like, it was the most underwhelming hypercharge I've seen in a while. Ruffs is staying in the B tier. Ruffs was one of the few brawlers that did get buffed this update, but it was just a slight buff to his hypercharge stats, so he's still pretty much exactly where he was last update. Byron is moved from the A tier down into the B tier. Byron used to be the go-to healer, but there are just better options right now, so he's not being played quite as much. Finks is starting off in the B tier. He's one of the newest brawlers in the game. In fact, the newest brawler in the game, with the exception of Lumi, who has not been released yet. But the point is, Finks has not been used very much competitively right now, so it's kind of tough to tell exactly how good he is. Most of the pros agree, though, that he's about average, maybe a little bit better. Maybe. Belle is staying in the B tier. Belle actually might deserve to be a little bit higher on this list because of the gadget rework, and it's been really beneficial for her nest eggs gadget. But overall, she's still average and not as good as other sharpshooters. Buzz is actually moved from the B tier up in, or the C tier up into the B tier. Buzz didn't receive any buffs or anything like that, but he is a decent assassin, even against brawlers that counter him, like kind of for the most part, you know? So he's doing pretty well right now. Tick is staying in the B tier. Tick can deal with those close range brawlers better than most other throwers, but he's still only good on a few certain maps. So B tier makes sense for Tick. Squeak is staying in the B tier. Squeak's wind-up gadget is actually being used a lot now, and while people are playing Squeak a bit differently, he's only kind of slightly better than he was before. Piper's moving from the A tier down into the B tier. Sharpshooters in general are struggling a little bit right now in this current meta, and Piper has particularly struggled in this situation. Got some tanky brawlers up at the top. Sandy is staying in the B tier, very top of the B tier actually. No changes were made to Sandy, but he seems to be playing into the current meta a little bit better than before. A tier brawlers. These brawlers are typically good in a lot of situations. They're not as dependent on counters or playing with the right brawlers or the right maps and modes and stuff like that. They're just not quite as good as the S tier brawlers. Starting us off, we got Gus moving from the S tier down into the A tier. Now, Gus received a nerf to his attack damage and the damage from his Cookie Popper gadget, and he could very well even be a B tier brawler right now, so we're putting him on the cusp between A and B. Kit is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Kit's placement really relies a lot on what other brawlers are doing at the top of the meta, and right now, a lot of his best teammates are being played a lot. Daryl is staying in the A tier. Daryl is still a solid assassin against most brawlers, but this new meta has probably hurt him a little bit. Nita is moved from the B tier up into the A tier. Nita is actually a pretty good counter to a lot of the top brawlers at the moment, and she can be a really safe choice on a lot of maps. Kenji is staying in the A tier. Kenji's super got nerfed basically because of how it was reworked, right? So now brawlers can better tell where he's going to pop up and kind of preemptively aim there so he cannot avoid damage. Either way though, he's still a really strong aggressive brawler. Lumi is starting off her debut in the A tier. Keep in mind that Lumi has not been released at this time, at least not as this video has been recorded, and the pro players, most of them have not had a chance to play her, but she seems to have good range, lots of area control, consistent damage output, so A tier seems pretty fine to me. Just keep in mind that this is my own personal placement, and with the help of my content producer Moxie, who's actually much better at the game than I am. And so take this with a grain of salt, but I think A tier makes a lot of sense for her. Sprout is moving the B tier up into the A tier. A lot of Sprout's tier placement kind of depends on the current competitive map pool, and right now there are a lot of great maps for Sprout, so A tier makes sense. Surge is moving from the S tier down into the A tier. Surge is still a really strong brawler, but we're seeing a particular brawler with this spawns a lot of annoying pets at the moment at the top of the meta, and Surge struggles against that. So yeah, Rico is staying in the A tier. Rico's another brawler that is just really tough to counter, and he can completely dominate on certain maps. It's frustrating. Honestly, the best counter is like wall breakers, but then Rico outranges a lot of wall breakers. It's annoying. Couldn't tell I banned Rico a lot. Larry and Laurie are staying in the A tier. Larry's still one of the best throwers in the game, but he still isn't the best thrower, and lots of top brawlers actually play pretty well into him, so he's struggling. Well, he's not struggling. He's still A tier. He's really good, just not the best. Griff is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. That is what I'm talking about. Is playing really well into a lot of the top brawlers right now, and the gadget rework has enabled him to completely change map layouts if he has enough time. I have been playing Griff so hard for a long time, and I'm so glad. I really like Griff. I just like him. And nobody seems to be playing him. He's never banned. He's never picked. He's always available for me to play. So it's great. I probably shouldn't be, I mean, maybe I shouldn't be saying all this. Griff sucks, people. Don't play him. Don't ban him. He sucks. Don't waste your time. Yeah, Maisie is staying in the A tier. Very similar to Surge, Maisie is a great choice into most aggressive brawlers, but pets and spawns cause really big problems for her, so watch out for Mr. P. Frank is staying in the A tier. Frank is getting countered a lot more often, but he's still strong enough to where he will easily beat teams that just don't have enough damage output, so you have to consider it. Colette is moved from the B tier up into the A tier. Colette might be one of the brawlers that benefit the most from how much this meta has changed, despite not getting any buffs at all, simply because a lot of the top brawlers are tankier. And when brawlers that are tanky are doing better and are played more, then Colette does more damage. So she's pretty good. It's kind of funny. She's so weird. Her placement will go anywhere on the tier list, way up high or way down low, simply because of which brawlers are being played competitively. It's funny. Melody is staying in the A tier. Melody is currently one of the toughest close range brawlers to counter because of her mobility and the sheer damage that gets put out from her hypercharge. It can be just so obnoxious. By the way, I wanted to give a huge thank you to Flesk for teaching me how to increase the width of the tier list. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. B is moving from the C tier all the way up into the A tier. That's a big jump for her. Oh yes, she received her hypercharge this update, and that alone was enough to move her up not just 1 tier, but 2 tiers. Whew, man, I gotta play some B more. I like her. Barley's moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Barley is one of the best brawlers in the game on maps with lots of walls, even against brawlers that counter him, so he's pretty good at the moment. Gene is staying in the A tier. Gene does not play into brawler spawns very well, but he's a great support for other top brawlers at the moment, so he's being played a little bit more than usual. 8-Bit is staying in the A tier. 8-Bit makes a great gem carrier, and he's one of the hardest brawlers to counter. At least on certain maps. Ash is moving from the S tier down into the A tier. Ash is one of the strongest aggressive brawlers in the game, but many top brawlers make short work of his super, so he's struggling a little bit more in this meta. Angelo is staying in the A tier. Angelo is still one of the best sharpshooters in the game, but he is being used slightly less because of the competitive map pool. Kind of funny how you make a brawler that relies on there being water, and then you remove water, and then he struggles. So anyway, Max is staying in the A tier. As usual, Max can be a very solid brawler that can be used just about anywhere, and she's a great support brawler to a lot of the top brawlers at the moment. Max is just one of those brawlers that, like, she is so good competitively and so bad in lower ranks. It's just kind of funny how that works. I mean, not in the hands of a pro, obviously. Like, a pro is going to be good with her anywhere, but, you know. Gray is staying in the A tier. Gray is an even better support brawler for the top brawlers right now than Max is even, and basically doubles as an assassin with his hypercharge. He's also really good at brawl hockey, which I guess is competitive now, so we have to consider that. Amber is staying in the A tier. She's another brawler that can be really hard to counter, and she can also burn lots of bushes, which can actually really turn the game around against certain brawlers that rely on those, or that may even be using like the speed gear, or, you know, something like that, the vision gear, whatever. Penny is staying in the A tier. Penny is still one of the safest choices in the game for almost any map, but she doesn't quite have the stats to be an S tier brawler at the moment. Juju's moving from the S tier down into the A tier. She's still one of the best throwers in the game, but she received a nerf to her supercharge rate, so she's not completely totally broken at the moment. Thankfully, not as annoying as Mr. P is right now. Mandy's moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Nothing's really changed for Mandy except for her new hypercharge. And it's funny because I thought her hypercharge wasn't going to be that great, but it turns out to actually be pretty good. It's made her a lot better. Lou is staying in the A tier. Lou actually received a nerf to his hypercharge charge rate, so he's not getting as many hypercharges anymore, but he's still probably one of the best tank counters in the game, and we're seeing a lot of tanks at the moment. Meeple's moving from the S tier down into the A tier. Now, Meeple had not been released when I made the last tier list, and he was honestly kind of weak on release. Definitely not S tier like we thought, but a recent slight buff to his reload speed has made a world of difference for him. And then we have the gadget rework, which also helped him out a lot. Okay. S tier brawlers. These are the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the band of the band. Because you're going to want to ban them all, especially the top 3. And if nobody bans them, you better be picking them unless you don't have them maxed out. Starting us off, we got Stu staying in the S tier. Stu received a nerf to the healing from his Gasso heal star power, but his hypercharge is still one of the best in the game. He's basically impossible to counter when he's using that. Poco is moving from the B tier up into the S tier. Poco has probably benefited the most from the gadget rework, and his protective tunes is a very hard counter to several of the best brawlers in the game. Janet is moving from the A tier up into the S tier. Her hypercharge is one of the strongest in the game, and she is playing particularly well into the best brawlers since she can deal with the brawler pets better than most. Barry is moving from the A tier up into the S tier. Barry is not only a great thrower, but for those of you guys who may have not realized this, he can also heal with his attacks. So for all of you guys who are not pros and are only playing him as an offensive attacker, please remember that Barry will heal, and all of a sudden, he'll go from being like a C tier, B tier brawler to an S tier brawler. Heal your teammates, people. Barry's attacks don't stack, okay? Cover large areas. Sorry. My teammates have been sucking with Barry, and it's been making me annoyed. He's really good right now. Oh, man. Mr. P moving from the F tier to being the third best brawler in the game right now. The only reason Mr. P isn't the best brawler in the game is because sometimes he still struggles to charge his new hypercharge. But once he does, the enemy team is certainly going to lose because it's brutally strong. Ollie is moving from the A tier up into the S tier. Second best brawler in the game. Very similar to Meeple, Ollie had not been released when I made the last tier list, and he also wasn't very strong upon release, but recent buffs to his attack damage and super have made him very broken. Okay. The best of the best. Hank is moving from the worst placement on the last tier list, and it was the worst for a long time, all the way up past every single brawler in the game and is now considered the best brawler in the game. Talk about a jump. And it is all thanks to Hank's hypercharge. Hank is just more consistent than Mr. P's hypercharge, and it has more potential to completely wipe out the enemy team. The damage is insane. It's really hard to avoid it. I can't believe Hank is so dang good right now. I was not prawn ready. Honestly, I still don't know if I'm prawn ready, but the pros are definitely prawn ready. And that is every brawler ranked from worst to best. Obviously some insane changes this update. Make sure you leave a comment in below to tell me what Supercell can do in the next update to shake things up even more. Or maybe you like where this is at. I don't know. Either way, massive thank you to the pro players who helped make this tier list. Seriously, could not do it without them. Massive thank you to them. I'm going to be continuing updating this tier list, so make sure you guys subscribe for more content. And if you do share that tier list with anybody, make sure you don't crop my face out. Thank you guys so much. I'd really appreciate you using code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop or on store.supercell.com. We'll see you in the next video.